The sky was clear, the stars twinkling like diamonds on a velvet blanket, when everything changed. Earth had always been safe under the blue sky, a planet untouched by the struggles of the universe. But that night, something stirred in the heavens. It was subtle at first, just a flicker in the sky, a distortion, almost like a ripple across the stars. But it was enough to draw the attention of anyone who was paying close attention. A few military satellites picked it up, at first just a tiny anomaly, a strange blip on their screens. They thought it was a glitch, a mistake, something that would pass. Then the ships arrived. Massive, so large they dwarfed Earth's largest structures. They emerged from the dark expanse of space with terrifying speed. They didn't just enter Earth's orbit, they filled it. Hundreds of them. Gigantic vessels, their surfaces smooth and glistening, reflecting the distant light of the sun. These were no ordinary ships. No one had seen anything like them before, not even in the most imaginative sci-fi stories. Their shapes were unlike anything humanity had ever designed. Long, sleek, and menacing. They seemed almost alive, pulsing with a strange energy, as if they were organic and mechanical at the same time. The ships did not come in peace. On Earth, panic spread like wildfire. The first broadcast was simple and chilling. A cold, mechanical voice, echoing in every language across the planet, filled the airwaves. It was a message from the invaders. "We are the Serelith," the voice said. "You will surrender control of your planet to us immediately. Failure to comply will result in the destruction of your world." Governments scrambled to respond. The United Nations issued a statement, calling for calm. But it was too late. The people had seen the ships. The cities were already starting to shut down, the lights flickering in fear as everyone prepared for the worst. Military forces were mobilized, but everyone knew they were outclassed. The Serelith had arrived, and Earth was helpless against their might. General Mason was the first to speak to the world. His face was grim, the weight of the situation pressing down on his shoulders. He stood at the head of a makeshift command center, surrounded by his top officers, as he delivered a speech to the masses. "We will not bow to these invaders. We will fight." His voice boomed through every television, radio, and communication network on Earth. "We are humanity. We will not surrender. No matter what happens, we will defend our home." But even as he spoke those words, doubt gnawed at the back of his mind. He had seen the size of the ships, the power they exuded. How could humanity possibly fight such an advanced race? The Serelith were a mystery, their technology light years ahead of anything humanity had ever dreamed of. It felt like a nightmare. But General Mason knew that if he showed fear, the people would follow suit. So he spoke with the confidence of someone who believed in humanity's strength, though deep down, he wasn't sure they stood a chance. In every city, in every corner of the globe, people were terrified. Those with the means to escape fled to underground bunkers, hoping to survive the coming storm. Others simply watched the skies, waiting for the inevitable. The Serelith didn't attack immediately. Instead, they watched, their ships hovering in the air, seemingly waiting for something. The message had been sent. The ultimatum was clear: surrender or be destroyed. As the first few hours passed, humanity's panic slowly turned into a restless anger. People gathered in the streets, demanding action. Leaders and politicians debated in closed rooms, but outside, the world held its breath, waiting for something, anything to happen. The Serelith ships continued to hover above the planet, but no attacks came. It was almost as if they were waiting for humanity to submit, and it seemed like that was what they wanted: compliance, fear, submission. The entire planet seemed paralyzed, caught in an endless moment of indecision. But as the days passed, something unexpected began to stir among the people of Earth. The fear, though still present, was slowly replaced by something else: a quiet, burning fury. The idea of surrender didn't sit well with humanity. They couldn't just roll over. They were the species that had gone to the moon, that had survived the darkest moments of history, that had built empires and brought about change. They couldn't simply be erased from the galaxy like this. Among the scattered resistance movements forming in small pockets across the globe, a young officer, Captain Alina Harris, stood out. She was a fighter, determined not to let Earth fall without a fight. She knew the odds were slim, but she believed that humanity had something the Cyrilith couldn't account for: their spirit. As Alina stood at the front of a small group of military personnel gathered in an underground facility, she turned to face the team she had assembled. Her voice was steady, calm, but there was fire in her eyes. "They think we're weak," she said, pointing toward the monitor showing images of the Cyrilith fleet. "They think we're just going to fold. But we're not. We're going to show them that Earth isn't just a place to conquer. It's a place to fight for. We're going to make them regret underestimating us." The officers around her nodded, understanding that the odds of success were slim. But they also knew they had no other choice. Humanity's survival depended on this resistance. The world had no time to waste, no time to wonder what could have been. They had to act now. Meanwhile, General Mason's words echoed across the world, a beacon of defiance amidst the chaos. "We will not surrender. We will resist until our last breath." The question was no longer whether Earth could fight back. It was how. The Cyrilith had the upper hand in every aspect: advanced technology, superior weapons, and an unyielding presence. Yet humanity was determined. As long as one person stood, the fight would continue. The days dragged on, each one feeling like an eternity as the Cyrilith ships continued to watch, waiting for Earth's inevitable capitulation. But the people weren't ready to give in. Quiet rebellions sparked up in the streets, people organizing in secret, planning for an uprising. Leaders like Captain Alina Harris began to gather support, each one willing to take on the Cyrilith in any way they could. But there was something bigger, something even more dangerous, waiting in the background. The Cyrilith were not just invaders, they were conquerors. And the more they waited, the more humanity's options were running out. A final, terrible decision loomed on the horizon. The aliens had thought they ruled humanity, that Earth would fall in line with their demands. But what the Cyrilith didn't understand was the strength of a species that had fought through the worst of times, that had risen up against every obstacle placed before them. Humanity wasn't just a collection of fragile beings, they were survivors. And the Cyrilith were about to learn just how powerful it could be. As Earth's leaders huddled, planning their next move, a single truth settled over everything. They hadn't given up yet. And in that small flicker of resistance, humanity would show the Cyrilith who they really were. The story was only just beginning. The hours after the Cyrilith's arrival had been filled with confusion and fear. But as time passed, something began to shift within humanity. The world had been brought to its knees, but it was slowly starting to stand again. A small spark of defiance was beginning to glow in places where there was once only panic. General Mason's speech had ignited a fire in people across the globe. His words had given them something they hadn't had before: hope. Hope that humanity, despite being faced with an overwhelming enemy, could still fight. That spark was spreading, and in secret bunkers and hidden rooms, military strategists were quietly meeting. They weren't giving up, not without a fight. They would find a way to make the Cyrilith pay for their arrogance. Meanwhile, the Cyrilith ships continued to hover above Earth, casting a dark shadow over the planet. Every city, every nation was in a state of emergency. Governments scrambled to coordinate a response, but with the advanced technology of the Cyrilith far beyond anything humanity had ever seen, it felt like they were simply playing catch-up. As the days went on, the aliens' patience began to wear thin. Earth had yet to surrender, and the Cyrilith weren't used to being defied. Their fleet, though silent, was a constant reminder of the impending destruction that awaited humanity if they didn't submit. In the midst of this chaos, Captain Alina Harris and her team had a plan, one that seemed impossible, but it was all they had. After days of gathering intel, they discovered a weakness. The Cyrilith, despite their advanced technology, were not invincible. Their fleet relied heavily on a massive command ship, a flagship that controlled their entire operation. If they could disable the flagship, they might have a chance to disrupt the Cyrillith's control over the rest of the fleet. It was a risky move. The flagship was heavily protected, surrounded by dozens of warships and drones. The odds of success were slim, but Elena had no other options. If humanity didn't strike now, the Cyrillith would tighten their grip and crush them. There was no room for hesitation. The team gathered in the operations room, the flickering lights above them casting long shadows. Elena stood at the head of the table, her face set with determination. "We got one shot at this," she said, her voice calm but firm. "We're going to take out their flagship. We hit it hard, hit it fast, and we leave before they can retaliate." The officers around her nodded, understanding the stakes. If they failed, humanity would have no hope. But if they succeeded, it would send a message that Earth wasn't going down without a fight. It would be a blow to the Cyrillith that they wouldn't forget. They had a plan, a daring one. They would infiltrate the outskirts of the Cyrillith fleet using a stealth technology developed by Earth's brightest minds. The ship they would use was a modified human vessel, the Aquila, a fast, cloaked ship capable of sneaking past the Cyrillith defenses undetected. The goal was to approach the flagship from behind and launch a surprise attack, hitting the vital systems before the enemy could react. As the team prepared for their mission, Elena couldn't help but feel the weight of responsibility. She knew how important this was, not just for her team, but for the entire planet. If they failed, they would be finished. But if they succeeded, it could be the turning point in the war. The countdown began. The Aquila slipped silently into space, its cloaking technology making it invisible to the Cyrillith ships. Elena and her crew were silent, focused on the task ahead. There was no room for mistakes. The flagship loomed ahead, a massive structure, its sleek black surface dotted with glowing lights that resembled eyes. It was intimidating, like staring at the heart of the beast. Approaching the target, Elena's voice was a whisper over the comms. "Steady, everyone. We're not here to play games. We're here to show them what humanity can do." The Aquila moved closer, weaving through the debris of destroyed satellites and broken ships, careful not to draw attention. They were so close now, and the flagship loomed ever larger on their screens. It felt like time had slowed, every second stretching into eternity. The Cyrillith had no idea they were there. Elena could almost hear her heartbeat in the silence of the ship. "Prepare for launch," she ordered. "On my mark. 3, 2, 1, now." The crew sprang into action, sending a barrage of powerful energy blasts toward the flagship's core systems. The explosion was deafening, a burst of light that tore through the heart of the ship. For a moment, Elena thought they had succeeded, that they had actually done it. They had struck a blow against the Cyrillith. But the explosion only caused a brief flicker of disruption. The Cyrillith flagship was damaged, but not destroyed. The rest of the fleet began to react, and a new wave of enemy ships descended upon them. The Aquila was surrounded. "We need to get out of here now," shouted one of the officers, his voice tinged with panic. The plan had worked in part, but they were running out of time. Elena's mind raced. They were surrounded, with no way to escape. The Cyrillith had reacted faster than they anticipated, and now they were trapped. It was over. But Elena wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. Initiating evasive maneuvers, she shouted, slamming her hand down on the controls. The Aquila surged forward, trying to break free from the tightening circle of alien ships. For a moment, everything seemed to blur. The sound of alarms filled the air, and the ship was rocked by blasts from the enemy fleet. Elena fought to keep control, but the ship was taking hits. They couldn't keep this up for much longer. "Captain," one of her officers called out, "we're losing power. The ship's been hit in multiple places." Elena gritted her teeth. They had one shot left. They needed to escape, but they also needed to send a message, to show the Cyrillith that humanity wasn't finished. She turned to her crew, the determination in her eyes clear. "We're not running away," she said. "We're going to finish what we started." In that moment, Alina made a decision. She activated the ship's self-destruct sequence, a last-ditch effort to cause as much damage as possible to the Cyrillith fleet before they were captured. It was the only way to make sure their mission wasn't in vain. The countdown began, and Alina's heart pounded in her chest. "Get to the escape pods," she yelled. "We've done our part. Now go." As her crew scrambled to evacuate, Alina stayed behind, watching as the seconds ticked down. The Aquila would be gone in moments, but in those final moments, Alina knew that she had done everything she could. They had sent a message to the Cyrillith. Humanity wasn't just going to lie down and die. And when the Aquila exploded, the shockwave rippled through the Cyrillith fleet. For a brief moment, their arrogance was shattered. They had underestimated humanity's resolve. The aliens had thought they ruled Earth. They had thought that humanity was weak, ready to fall at the first sign of danger. But the message was clear. Earth was not done yet. The war had only just begun. The blast from the Aquila's self-destruct echoed through space, a brilliant flash that lit up the darkness of the void. For a few moments, all was silent. Then, chaos erupted. The Cyrillith fleet, caught off guard by the sudden explosion, scattered in a wave of disarray. It was the first real blow humanity had struck against them. The flagship, although still intact, was visibly shaken. Systems across the alien ships flickered and buzzed, their control shaken by the unexpected act of defiance. Alina Harris stood in the escape pod, watching the screen, her heart still pounding from the explosion. She had done what she needed to do. The Aquila was gone, but its destruction would not be forgotten. Humanity had just shown the Cyrillith something they hadn't expected, that Earth would not fall without a fight. The escape pod's emergency system had activated, pulling her and her crew away from the chaos. They were now drifting, floating in space, waiting to be rescued or captured. But even as they orbited the planet, Alina knew they had accomplished something far greater than they could have hoped. They had sent a message. They had shown that humanity had the will to fight back, even against such overwhelming odds. On Earth, the news of the Aquila's sacrifice spread quickly. The destruction of the ship was devastating, but it became a symbol, the symbol of humanity's first stand against the invaders. People around the world felt the shift, as if something inside them had clicked. They weren't powerless. They weren't alone. The resistance had begun. But the Cyrillith were not blind. They didn't underestimate humanity again. The explosions across their fleet hadn't caused as much damage as Alina had hoped. The flagship was still operational, and their forces had reassembled with frightening speed. The Cyrillith had learned from the Aquila's assault, and they would be ready for the next strike. In the aftermath, Earth's leaders convened. The initial fear that had paralyzed them was now replaced by a more focused kind of terror. The Cyrillith had taken notice, and their patience was running thin. Despite humanity's newfound defiance, the aliens had only one goal: total domination. Earth had shown them they weren't helpless, but they had also drawn their ire. General Mason, still reeling from the destruction of the Aquila, knew that Earth was far from prepared to go up against the Cyrillith in a prolonged war. They had no fleet, no weapons strong enough to challenge the aliens head-on. But they did have something else. They had Earth's ingenuity, and they had the will to fight, to survive, to defend their home. And that was something the Cyrillith didn't understand. "We need more than just a resistance," Mason said in a meeting with Earth's top military officials. "We need a real counteroffensive. We can't just keep reacting. It's time we take the fight to them." Captain Alina Harris, now back on Earth, was at the heart of the planning. The first step was to get as many humans as possible off-world, to build a resistance beyond Earth. They would need to prepare, to regroup, to turn the tide. And to do that, they had to reach the stars. Alina's mind raced. The loss of the Aquila had been heavy, but it had also proven that humanity could fight. The aliens might have more advanced weapons, more ships, more firepower, but they were not invincible. There was something unpredictable about humanity that the Cyrillith couldn't calculate. They didn't understand the kind of resolve that drove people to risk everything for freedom. As military leaders discussed plans for the future, Alina spent her days analyzing the Cyrillith fleet's movements. She had seen enough of their strategy to know that they were not invulnerable. Their strength was in their numbers and their coordination, but that could be disrupted. The Cyrillith didn't expect Earth to strike at their leadership. They were too focused on defeating the planet. That was their mistake. "We need to hit their command," Alina said one evening to a small group of top-level strategists. "If we take out the Cyrillith leadership, we disrupt their entire operation. They rely on a single point of control. If we eliminate that, we can destabilize their entire fleet." It was a dangerous plan, perhaps the most dangerous yet, but it was their only hope. For weeks, Earth's best minds worked together to develop a new kind of weapon. They didn't have the time to build a fleet capable of challenging the Cyrillith head-on, but they could strike quickly and hit hard. The weapon would be an energy-based device that could disable entire fleets by short-circuiting their power systems. It was a risky move, a one-shot attack with no guarantee of success. Meanwhile, the Cyrillith made their move. They launched a series of attacks on Earth's remaining defense outposts, testing humanity's resilience. But each time, they underestimated the resolve of the human soldiers and civilians fighting to protect their planet. The resistance was everywhere now. People who had once been too afraid to speak out were joining the cause, offering what little they could to the fight. In the underground bunkers and military bases, soldiers trained for what felt like a hopeless war. But with each passing day, the chances of survival grew stronger. The Cyrillith may have had the upper hand, but humanity had something far greater: the will to win. The willingness to do whatever it took, no matter the cost, to protect their home. But the Cyrillith were not sitting idly by, watching humanity regroup. They were angry. They were furious. Their arrogance had been shaken, and they had learned from their past mistakes. No longer would they simply hover above the planet, waiting for humanity to bow down. They would bring the full force of their fleet to Earth, ready to annihilate the resistance once and for all. The countdown to the final battle had begun. As Earth prepared for war, Alina found herself in the heart of the resistance, leading the charge. There would be no more hesitation. The time for defensive measures was over. The time for humanity to show the Cyrillith who they were had arrived. They had thought they ruled humanity. They had believed Earth was weak, that it would bend to their will. But now, with a battle plan in place and humanity united, they would soon learn what it meant to face a species with nothing left to lose. Humanity wasn't going down without a fight. The days leading up to the next battle felt like an eternity. Earth was on the edge, with the Cyrillith fleet still hovering above, waiting for the inevitable surrender that humanity had so far refused to give. But every passing day, Earth's resolve grew stronger. The world was no longer in chaos. Instead, there was an almost eerie calm among the people. It was as if the storm had passed, and now, in the quiet aftermath, they were preparing for something far worse. In secret underground bases and military bunkers, humanity's greatest minds worked tirelessly to finish the weapon that could turn the tide. The new energy weapon, still untested, was humanity's last chance to strike back at the Cyrillith's fleet. It was a powerful device capable of knocking out the Cyrillith's shields and disabling their ships in a single blow. But there was no room for error. If they failed, it would be the end. General Mason, now fully committed to the mission, knew that they had to hit the Cyrillith at their weakest point, the flagship. This was the heart of their operation, and without it, the rest of the fleet would fall into disarray. The weapon would be their best shot at a decisive blow, but it wasn't enough just to have the weapon. They needed the element of surprise, and for that, they would need a team to infiltrate the Cyrillith's defenses. Alina Harris, now one of the most experienced leaders of the resistance, was chosen to lead the mission. Her determination, Her clear understanding of the enemy's tactics and her proven courage made her the ideal candidate. Elena, though she didn't show it, felt the weight of responsibility. The fate of humanity rested on her shoulders, and the thought of failure was too much to bear. The plan was simple. A small team, led by Elena, would infiltrate the Cyrilith flagship using one of Earth's cloaked ships. Once inside, they would deploy the energy weapon and take control of the ship's core systems. This would give them the ability to shut down the entire fleet from within. However, the chances of success were slim. The Cyrilith were formidable, and the flagship's defenses were unlike anything Earth had ever encountered. But the mission had to be carried out. There was no other choice. As the days dwindled down, Elena gathered her team. The group was small, made up of the most skilled soldiers and technicians Earth had to offer. Among them was Captain Noah Lee, an expert in combat tactics, Dr. Evelyn Jen, a scientist and the mastermind behind the energy weapon, and Lieutenant Marco Delgado, a skilled hacker who could manipulate enemy systems. Each of them understood the risk they were taking, but they were all ready to do whatever it took to save their planet. The night before the mission, Elena stood outside in the cold, staring up at the sky. The Cyrilith fleet loomed like a dark, ominous shadow. Earth had become their battlefield, and soon they would be forced to act. The thought of what might happen the next day twisted her stomach, but she pushed it away. She had a mission to complete, and failure was not an option. "We'll make it," Elena whispered to herself, though she knew how hard the fight ahead would be. "We have to." The next morning, they were ready. The Shadowhawk, a modified human stealth ship, was their transport. It was fast, cloaked, and deadly, everything they needed to infiltrate the enemy's flagship. The team boarded the ship, their hearts heavy with the knowledge that they might never return. But their purpose was clear, and that was enough to keep them moving forward. As the Shadowhawk launched into the atmosphere, Elena took one last look at Earth, the planet they were fighting for, the world that had birthed them all. It had never felt more precious, more worth protecting. The thought of losing it was too much to bear, and so they pushed forward. The journey through space was tense. The team was silent, each person focused on their role. Dr. Zhen worked to monitor the systems that would power the weapon, making sure it was ready for deployment. Captain Lee checked the battle plans, ensuring that they knew exactly where to strike once inside the flagship. Lieutenant Delgado prepped the hacking devices they would need to disable the Cyrilith security systems once they were inside. As they approached the flagship, the enormity of it hit them. It was a massive structure, its hull dark and foreboding, dotted with glowing energy pulses that seemed to hum with a life of their own. The ship was a fortress, and it was heavily guarded. Hundreds of smaller ships circled around it, acting as sentries. The Cyrilith were prepared for an assault, but they weren't prepared for a stealth attack. "We're in position." Delgado's voice came over the comms, his tone calm, though everyone knew the gravity of the situation. "Cloaking is holding. They don't know we're here." Elena nodded, her jaw clenched. "Then let's move quickly." The Shadowhawk slipped past the outer defenses of the flagship, its cloaking device keeping them invisible. Every second that passed felt like an eternity, but they were making it. They were inside the Cyrilith stronghold, but things quickly went wrong. As they approached the core of the flagship, Elena received an alert on her screen. "We've been detected," she muttered under her breath. The Cyrilith were no fools. They must have detected a small anomaly in their sensors. The cloaking wasn't enough to hide them for long. The alarm blared, and a voice came over the ship's speakers, harsh, guttural, and unmistakable. "Intruders detected. All systems go to red alert." The Cyrilith had activated their defenses, and the Shadowhawk was now in the fight of its life. "We have to move fast," Elena ordered. "Delgado, you've got to get us past their security. We don't have much time." "I'm on it," Delgado replied. His fingers flew across the controls, hacking into the Serelith system with a speed and precision that only a true expert could manage. The ship lurched as it dodged incoming fire, trying to stay ahead of the oncoming waves of enemy ships. A Shadowhawk shook as it took a hit, but it was still operational. Alina's heart pounded in her chest as they approached the heart of the flagship. They were almost there. "I'm in," Delgado called out, his voice filled with relief. "I've got control of their internal systems. The shields are down." "Dr. Zhen, deploy the weapon," Alina commanded. With a quick motion, Dr. Zhen activated the device, sending a pulse of energy into the Serelith's core systems. The flagship trembled, and the hum of its powerful engines faltered. The Serelith fleet began to falter as well, their ships falling into disarray. But their victory was short-lived. "Get to the escape pods," Alina shouted, her eyes scanning the chaos around her. "The flagship is about to self-destruct. We've done what we can. Now, we need to get out." The team scrambled toward the escape pods, fighting against the Serelith's counterattacks as they went. Every moment felt like a fight against time, with explosions going off around them. They were almost there, but the flagship was beginning to break apart. They had only seconds to escape. As Alina dove into the escape pod, she knew that the battle was far from over. The Serelith might have been shaken, but they were not defeated. But the humans had made their mark. They had proven that they could not be dominated, that they would not be cowed by any force, no matter how great. The escape pod launched, sending the team back toward Earth's atmosphere. Their mission accomplished. They had struck a blow against the Serelith, but Alina knew the fight was far from over. As Earth's atmosphere enveloped them, she looked out the small window at the planet below. Humanity had just shown the Serelith who they were. And they had only just begun. The war for Earth was far from over, but for the first time, Alina could see the faintest glimmer of hope. They were not defeated. They were not broken. They would fight until the very end. The weeks following the mission to destroy the Serelith flagship were a blur of chaos, fear, and hope. The Shadowhawk and its crew had barely escaped the self-destructing wreckage of the flagship, and as they re-entered Earth's atmosphere, they knew that what they had just accomplished was nothing short of extraordinary. The Serelith fleet was not destroyed, but it was shaken. For the first time since their arrival, the invaders were no longer in complete control. Earth's resistance had struck a blow that reverberated across the globe. The news spread quickly. The media, once filled with reports of humanity's helplessness, now broadcasted a different message. Humanity was not defeated. People everywhere saw the footage of the Serelith flagship in chaos, of the energy weapon's devastating impact, and the courage of the crew who had risked everything for the survival of their planet. It was a moment of triumph, even if fleeting. But the Serelith were not a species to take defeat lightly. In the days following the attack, their fleet began to regroup. New ships arrived, reinforcements from deeper parts of their empire, and their technological superiority became more apparent. While the resistance on Earth had gained some ground, it was clear that the Serelith were not going to let their miscalculation go unpunished. General Mason called an emergency meeting with Earth's highest-ranking military and political leaders. The mood was somber. The victory from the destruction of the flagship was overshadowed by the cold reality that the Serelith were only getting stronger. "The Serelith will come for us," Mason said, his voice steady but filled with the weight of knowledge. "We've shown them that we're capable of hitting them, but they'll respond. They will not stop until they've wiped us off the face of this planet." The room was filled with tension. No one could argue with Mason's words, but they also knew that the resistance could not stop now. Every major power on Earth had joined the fight, from the Americas to Europe, Asia, and beyond. Human ingenuity and unity were now their greatest weapons. Captain Alina Harris, having just returned from the mission, stood before the gathered leaders. She was exhausted but resolute, her face hard with determination. She was a symbol of humanity's defiance, and her team's bravery had made her a hero in the eyes of millions. But Alina knew that their fight was just beginning. "We've hit them once," she began, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. "But now, we need to prepare for a full-scale counteroffensive. If we don't, we'll be crushed under the weight of their forces. We need to hit them where it hurts, disrupt their leadership and their fleet." Her words were simple but powerful. The room fell silent as the leaders processed the gravity of her statement. There was no more room for hesitation. Humanity had shown its ability to fight, but they needed to be organized, more efficient. The fight wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about reclaiming their planet and their future. The plan was drafted quickly. Humanity's best minds had developed a new kind of warfare, designed to hit the Serelith fleet in ways they wouldn't expect. They would strike not with brute force, but with strategy, intelligence, and speed. The Serelith relied on their technological advantage, but they were still vulnerable in key areas. The key would be disrupting their ability to communicate, to coordinate their forces, and to control their ships. The first strike would take place within the next few weeks. Humanity had built its first true fleet, pieced together from salvaged ships and human ingenuity. It was small, but it was fast. It was designed to strike at the Serelith's vulnerable points, to cause confusion, and to force them to divide their attention. It would not be a direct confrontation, not yet. The Serelith still had the upper hand in sheer firepower, but their arrogance had already been shaken. That was a weakness that humanity could exploit. The next few days were a whirlwind of preparation. Captain Harris and her team were given the most critical task: to lead the strike against one of the Serelith's hidden control hubs, a massive ship buried deep within their fleet. If they could destroy it, they would cripple the Serelith's ability to coordinate their forces and communication. "We're not just fighting for Earth," Alina said to her team as they prepared for the mission. "We're fighting for our future. For every person on this planet, for every person who thinks we're already lost, we show them that humanity isn't finished." The crew of the Shadowhawk, bolstered by new members, was ready to take on this next challenge. There was no room for fear now. It was all about action. Their mission was a dangerous one. The control hub was heavily guarded by both Serelith warships and automated defense systems. It would require everything they had learned in their previous battles, and more. But Alina knew the stakes. There was no other option. The Serelith needed to be brought to their knees. As the strike force deployed in the cold vacuum of space, Alina's thoughts were focused on the mission. She wasn't worried about herself. She was worried about the future of humanity. They were risking everything, but this wasn't just about taking back Earth. It was about proving that humans were more than just survivors. They were conquerors of their own fate. The attack on the Serelith control hub came with a fury. The Shadowhawk led the charge, weaving through Serelith defenses with breathtaking speed, the crew executing their plan flawlessly. Captain Lee commanded the ground team with precision, while Delgado and Jen worked together to hack the Serelith systems. The battles were fierce, but the human team was unstoppable. They moved with a sense of purpose that the Serelith had underestimated. Inside the heart of the control hub, Alina planted the final device that would disable the ship's ability to communicate. As the countdown began, she felt the full weight of the moment. Every second mattered. 5 seconds, Delgado's voice rang in her earpiece. 4, 3, 2. The explosion was deafening, a pulse that rippled through the entire fleet. The hub went dark, and in the blink of an eye, the Serelith fleet lost coordination. Their ships were scattered, their communication lines severed. It was an opening, an opportunity. "Go, go, go," Alina shouted, leading her team back toward the Shadowhawk. They had disrupted the Serelith's core operations, but the fight was far from over. As they returned to Earth's atmosphere, the message was clear. Humanity had made its move. The Serelith were no longer the unchallenged force they had once been. Their fleets were in disarray, and Earth's forces were mobilizing for the next phase of the war. General Mason's voice came over the comms as Alina and her team landed. "Well done, Captain. This is just the beginning. The Serelith will retaliate, but now, we're ready. Earth is ready." Elena looked at her crew, her heart swelling with pride. They had fought. They had shown the universe that humanity would not go down quietly. The battle was far from over, but humanity had proven something incredible. They had shown the Cyrillith and the universe who they really were. And that was only the beginning.